Well, we've been having a lot of fun on this segment over the last few months. Every Monday at this time, we take a look at the cost of common goods and services and try and figure out how much you should be paying for them. We've taken a look at things like grabbing a coffee. We've taken a look at things like paying for a tutor for your child. This week on the segment, how much should a funeral cost? Now, losing a loved one is never easy, but arranging a funeral can be just as difficult, from choosing the venue, finding out what the deceased would have wanted to be part of their funeral, and the expenses can stack up pretty easily. So what can you expect when you're trying to figure out the cost of holding a funeral? Let's find out more. Lora Grady is a personal finance reporter for the Toronto Star and recently looked at this very question. Lora, welcome to the program.
Thanks so much for having me this morning.
So, I guess what's the first thing people should be thinking about when it comes to funeral expenses?
I think the biggest thing that people should consider is planning ahead. No one really wants to think about death. It's kind of morbid, but the truth is, if you are able to plan ahead, it can save a lot of emotional distress for your loved ones, and it can also actually save them a lot of money in the end. A traditional funeral with a burial can cost anywhere from $5,000 to $25,000, which is a vast difference. So if you're able to plan ahead and, take care of some of those costs and do some pre-planning, it can be really helpful.
And, anyone who's gone through it, and I lost both my parents in the last 4 years, having gone through that, it is not lost on me. I wish, pre-planning, I wish that was done and not left to after the fact here. So how can you save? Like, how do you bring costs down if you're doing pre-planning?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the first thing to be aware of is the fact that there are a lot of extras involved with final arrangements. We don't really think about this, but those little touches at these beautiful services, they cost money. So, the memorial cards, the bookmarks, even the guest book for folks to sign, those all cost money. Video presentations with, slideshows, that kind of thing, flowers, catering. So if someone is going to be going through a funeral home, it's worth visiting with someone there and sitting down and legally they have to show you either an online or a printed price list. And so, they can go through that with you and let you know what costs are going to be essential and what costs are extra. And then, based on your own interests, you can decide what will make the most sense for your wishes and also for your budget.
Can we take a moment here to talk about the casket? What's the going rate for caskets now, and how is that a part of the expenses you need to plan for?
That's a great question too. I mean, caskets can be a big expense. They can cost tens of thousands of dollars. I think a lot of people think that if they're going through a funeral home or another service, they have to purchase the casket through that business. But that's actually not true. You can typically bring your own casket. Again, sounds kind of morbid, but there are a lot of small businesses across Canada that do make caskets. You can even buy them online through some providers, like Amazon sells them online, and so does Costco.
I knew Costco sells caskets. Amazon sells caskets?
Yeah.
Wow.
Okay. Yeah, we've reached that point of convenience.
Wow. Okay. Well, I guess, listen, again, if you're there and you're grieving and you're just presented with the options, you're just going to pay what's in front of you. But if you can plan ahead, I guess that's where the advantage comes in there in purchasing things like, caskets online.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I think, when people are, like you said, with your own losses, it's hard. You're very emotional and you're dealing with grief. And I think sometimes people also maybe feel like they should be spending more in order to honor this person. So even if you don't necessarily purchase these things in advance, just sit down and have a conversation with your loved ones and just get real about the budget and, what your wishes are and how that can be accommodated.
It's so true. Huh? Like, who wants to feel like they're being cheap when it comes to planning a funeral, right? For a loved one, right? You don't even want to think that that's even a consideration here.
Exactly.
Let's talk, Laura, about alternatives. What are some alternatives we should be thinking about besides, the more traditional ideas of a funeral?
Sure. So, I mean, one of the things obviously is religious considerations. Different religions have different beliefs, and so that you kind of have to start there. But, I have friends who, when they've lost their parents, they've had celebrations of life just at, the local pub, or they would throw a party on their own. I actually spoke to one person who runs a direct cremation business, and they had a family who had their father cremated, and they actually took him on a pub crawl to honor him. People have family reunions. They go on family vacations to honor this person. So there are a lot of alternative arrangements. My folks have actually told me that they don't necessarily want a memorial service. They just want to be cremated, and then they want us to have a party, and they want us to, share stories and kind of just skip the traditional idea.
And big difference, right, between burial and cremation. Is that, you think, an option? Obviously, I know there's other things to consider, religious reasons and that and the like. But is that a reason to consider cremation? The difference in cost.
Absolutely, the difference in cost is huge. There's a very well-known, famous cemetery here in Toronto called Mount Pleasant Cemetery, which would typically have higher costs. But just as an example, an adult burial plot there costs just over $38,000, whereas a cremation grave starts at $4,400.
Wow. Geez. It's tenfold difference, right, from 4 to 38.
Huge difference. And you also don't have to go through a funeral home for cremation. There are actually direct cremation services where, they'll take care of a lot of the final arrangements with you. They'll go through the government paperwork. But that's another way that you can actually save thousands of dollars, is just going that direct cremation route.
So what's, are there other alternatives that are coming? I've seen, unique ways of burials without caskets and that kind of stuff. Any other alternatives that we should be thinking about or looking into when it comes to planning a funeral?
For sure. Yeah. There are what are now being referred to as green burials. So these are kind of more eco-friendly options. Typically also a good way to save money. This is usually where there's no casket involved, or if there is, it's a biodegradable material or some kind of a shroud. And it's usually a separate part of the cemetery that they would use for these kinds of burials. But there's no embalming involved, which also can save money. So yeah, that's something that you can also look into for sure, especially if you're someone who is environmentally conscious.
Lora, before I have to let you go, is there anything that we haven't talked about yet in this interview that you think is particularly important that our listeners should be thinking about when it comes to planning a funeral and paying for a funeral?
I would just really emphasize the importance of talking to your loved ones about your wishes. Again, it's an uncomfortable conversation. It's not, something that is super uplifting, but it can save a lot of stress. And it's just really great to be able to communicate your wishes when you have the time and the ability to do so.
Lora, I'll read you a note here from a listener, Nancy, who says they did a prepaid funeral back in 1998 after they experienced the death of their great aunt, right? And the listener, Nancy, writes, I decided it would alleviate the added stress for my sons. It cost me all of $1,200. That's for a very simple gravesite service after cremation. So there's one person that said, okay, I'm going to pre-plan and take off the stress from loved ones by doing so. Lora, I have to leave it there. I want to thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks so much for having me.
That's Lora Grady, personal finance reporter over at the Toronto Star.
I'm Dylan Playfair.
And I'm Tyler Smith.
We're putting loneliness in the penalty box by talking to some of our favorite athletes about the importance of friendship.
This is Bromance.
Bromance is brought to you by Charm Diamond Centers, proudly Canadian-owned and operated. Charm has been part of your love stories and bromances for over 50 years. And you can find Bromance on the iHeartRadio network or wherever you get your podcasts.